All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
Hey there.
Today we're opening a file that I think for a lot of us is just it's etched into our memories, whether we want it to be or not.
It's a defining one, a real line in the sand.
It really is. We're talking about Columbine.
It's the watershed moment, and, we're sitting here on February 2nd, 2026.
Almost 27 years later.
Yeah, nearly 27 years, and it still feels like the dust hasn't settled. It's the event that really split recent American history into a before and an after.
Before and after how we look at schools, at safety.
Yeah.
Teenagers, really.
Completely. And it's not just a memory.
No, and that's the reason we're revisiting this right now. It isn't just about the historical weight. The story itself has it's changed.
It has.
There's been a very grim development as recently as early 2025 that actually forces us to rewrite the official statistics of that day.
That's right. History isn't static, and the what researchers call the Columbine effect is still very much active.
Explain that. What is the Columbine effect?
It's the idea that this specific tragedy became the origin code, like a script for violence that's been run, over 70 times by copycats as of last summer.
70. Wow.
It established a blueprint for how to do this.
So our mission today, it's pretty specific. We want to get past the pop culture version of this story. Ignore the TV movies, the rumors, and go straight to the source stack you've brought in. The police reports, FBI files, the actual journals.
And the really thorough Wikipedia compilation of all those events.
Exactly. We want to see what actually happened, stripped of all the mythology.
And believe me, there is a lot of mythology to strip away.
There is. And I think the place we have to start is with the biggest misconception of them all.
Okay.
If you ask the average person on the street what Columbine was, they'll tell you it was a school shooting. They'll say 2 kids went in with guns to shoot their classmates.
And that's the very first thing the source material it completely corrects. Columbine was not intended to be a school shooting.
It wasn't.
It was a failed bombing.
That distinction, failed bombing versus shooting. It feels like a technicality at first, but when you dig into their actual plan, it changes everything.
It changes the entire scale of their intent. I mean, a shooting is horrific, obviously, but a bombing? That's domestic terrorism.
Right.
Their goal wasn't to kill 12 students and a teacher. They wanted to kill hundreds.
They wanted to outdo the Oklahoma City bombing.
That's what they said. They wanted to bring the entire school library crashing down on top of the cafeteria. The shooting was just plan B. It was what they resorted to because their technology failed them.
And we are definitely going to get into the granular details of that failure because it's terrifying how close they came to succeeding.
It's chilling.
But before we get to the timeline, we have to talk about the who.
Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold.
The names everyone knows. And the narrative that sprung up almost immediately in 1999 was that these were, 2 isolated, friendless loners.
The outcast.
Yeah, the outcasts who were bullied relentlessly until they finally snapped. That whole Revenge of the Nerds story.
It's a very comfortable narrative, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, it gives us a clear cause and effect. Society pushed them, so they pushed back. It makes it understandable, in a way.
But looking at these profiles, that doesn't really hold up.
No, the reality is much more complex and much more disturbing. Let's start with Eric Harris. He was 18 at the time.
And he was an Air Force brat, as they say.
Exactly. He moved around constantly. His dad was a transport pilot, so they lived in Ohio, Michigan, New York.
He was always the new kid.
For a lot of his life, yeah. The family finally settled in Littleton, Colorado in 1993 after his father retired.
Which can be tough, for sure. But then you have Dylan Klebold, who is the complete opposite.
Total opposite. Dylan was 17, born and raised in Colorado. He had roots there.
And his home life.
Yeah.
It really flies in the face of the stereotype.
It really does. His parents were pacifists. They attended a Lutheran church. They were, very vocally anti-gun. This was not a household where violence was glorified at the dinner table.
And yet, these two find each other. And the label that got slapped on them, the one that I think most people still remember, is the trench coat mafia.
Ah, yes. The great media panic of 1999.
I remember the news footage, the anchors obsessing over this supposed goth gang that ran the school's underbelly.
And the trench coat mafia was a real group at Columbine. It was a clique of kids who were sort of the anti-jocks. They wore black trench coats, listened to industrial music.
But Harris and Klebold weren't in it.
They were not members. This is a key point. If you look at the official yearbook photos of the Trenchcoat Mafia from that year, Harris and Klebold are not in the picture.
So they were adjacent.
Exactly. They were friends with members, they floated in those circles, but they weren't in the gang.
So why the trench coats during the attack, if it wasn't a gang thing?
It was utility. Pure and simple. Think about the arsenal they were trying to conceal. You can't just walk through a high school parking lot with a sawed-off shotgun and a carbine rifle hanging by your side.
The coats were to hide the weapons.
It was a tactical decision. It had very little to do with a fashion statement.
It's just wild how a practical choice by a killer becomes a symbol for a whole subculture.
It's the power of media narrative.
But let's look at their behavior before the attack. Because they weren't exactly flying under the radar. They had a criminal record.
They did. And this is a piece of the puzzle that often gets glossed over. In January of 1998.
So a little more than a year before the massacre?
Right. They were arrested.
This was the van incident?
Yep. They broke into a parked van near Littleton, stole some tools, computer equipment, nothing huge. But it was a felony.
And they got caught.
They were caught, charged, and they pleaded guilty to felony theft.
Now, in many cases, this is where a real intervention might happen. You get into the system sees a red flag.
And they did get into the system. They were put into a juvenile diversion program.
Which is meant to keep kids out of jail.
Exactly. It involves counseling, community service, anger management classes, and by all official accounts, Harris and Klebold were the model students of this program.
They completely gamed it.
Perfectly. They went to the anger management classes. Harris wrote these incredibly articulate essays about how much he'd learned, how he understood the error of his ways.
He's chilling.
They were so convincing that their diversion officers released them from the program a month early.
For what?
For good behavior.
Wow. So they were sitting in anger management, nodding along, writing apology letters to the victim, all while they were actively planning the deadliest school attack in U.S. history.
It shows their ability to deceive, their cunning. They knew exactly what the adults wanted to hear. They could present this mask of sanity while their real lives were something else entirely.
And that calculation, that planning, it extended to the hardware.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to spend a minute on the arsenal because when you list it all out,
yeah,
it's just staggering that two teenagers could get all of this.
It is a massive cache. Let's break it down by the guns first.
Okay.
They had 4 guns between them. Eric Harris carried a Hi-Point 995 carbine, that's a 9mm semi-automatic rifle.
And a shotgun.
And a sawed-off Savage pump-action shotgun.
Okay, so that's Harris. What about Klebold?
Dylan Klebold had the infamous Tech-9 handgun.
A gun that was basically a media villain in the 90s.
Totally. A semi-automatic pistol. And he also had a sawed-off Stevens double-barrel shotgun.
So neither of them was old enough to buy these legally, at least not the handguns or the rifle. How did they get them?
This is the classic straw purchase scenario.
Yeah.
In late 1998, they went to a gun show.
With a friend.
With a friend of theirs, Robin Anderson. She was 18.
So she was of legal age.
She was. And at the gun show, she bought the Hi-Point carbine and the 2 shotguns for them from private sellers.
Which meant fewer background checks back then.
Exactly. The rules were different. It was what they called the gun show loophole. She handed over the cash, took the guns, and later gave them to Harris and Klebold.
And did she have any idea what they were planning?
Her testimony was that she had no clue. She said she thought they just wanted them for target shooting.
Wow.
But that one single act armed them with 3 of the 4 murder weapons.
And the 4th gun, the Tech-9.
That came from another friend, Mark Maines. He sold it to them for $500. He knew they were underage.
Did he get in trouble?
He did. He went to jail for providing a handgun to a minor.
But the guns? As we said, the guns were just the backup plan.
That's right.
The explosives are what really show their ambition. The source notes say they had 99 bombs.
99! Think about that. The sheer logistics of building 99 explosive devices in your parents' garage without anyone noticing.
What kind of bombs were they making?
It was a whole mix. They had simple pipe bombs.
Like galvanized pipe, gunpowder.
Yep. Filled with shrapnel. They had things they called crickets, which were CO2 cartridges, like for a BB gun that they filled with powder. They had Molotov cocktails.
But the main event, the heavy hitters.
The heavy artillery was the propane tanks.
And these weren't the little green camping canisters.
No. These were the standard 20-pound propane tanks you hook up to a barbecue grill. They took these tanks and rigged them with timing devices made from cheap alarm clocks.
So you have 2 high school kids building what are basically weapons of mass destruction in their suburban bedrooms.
And that brings us to the plan, the actual original plan for April 20th.
To understand the horror of what they wanted, you really have to visualize the school's layout.
You do. They took 2 large duffel bags. Inside each one was one of these 20-pound propane bombs, surrounded by cans of gasoline and shrapnel to maximize the carnage.
And they walked these into the cafeteria.
During the busiest time of day, the A lunch shift, they just placed these 2 bags under tables among all the other backpacks. Nobody gave them a second look.
And then they just walked out.
They walked out, leaving the timers ticking.
Set for a very specific moment.
11:17 a.m. At that moment, the cafeteria held 488 students.
Almost 500 people.
And the plan was for those bombs to detonate simultaneously. The fireball would have killed or maimed everyone in the immediate vicinity, but the real goal was the structural damage.
The library.
The library was located directly above the cafeteria.
So the blast was meant to go up.
The blast goes up, the floor of the library collapses, and everyone in the library falls into the burning cafeteria below.
Oh my God.
The police later estimated that if those bombs had worked as designed, the death toll would have easily been in the hundreds. It would have been the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history at that point.
And while all this was supposed to be happening, where were Harris and Klebold?
They planned to be outside in the parking lot waiting
For what?
to shoot the survivors. Their plan was to wait for the explosion, and then as the wounded, burning, terrified students came running out of the rubble, Harris and Klebold would be waiting with their rifles to pick them off.
It was a kill zone, a 2-stage ambush.
And they even planned for the police response.
The diversionary bombs.
Right. They planted a bomb in a field about 3 miles away. It was set to go off a few minutes earlier to draw the fire department and police away from the school, buying them more time.
And that smaller bomb actually did go off.
Right. It did, partially. It detonated and started a small fire. The diversion worked to a degree. But the main event, the cafeteria bombs, they failed.
So take us to that moment. It's 11:17 a.m. You're Harris and Klebold. You're outside. You're waiting for the world to end.
Yeah.
And then just silence.
11:17 comes and goes. 11:18. Inside, you can see on the surveillance footage, it's just a completely normal lunch period. The bombs are sitting there, inert.
Do we know why they failed?
Not for sure. It could have been faulty wiring, bad timers, something in their construction was flawed, but the terrorist attack was a failure.
And this is the pivot, the psychological turning point. Most people, if their plan failed so spectacularly, they might just run.
They'd panic, get out of there, cut their losses.
But they didn't run, they improvised.
At 11:19 a.m., realizing the explosion wasn't coming, they walked to the top of the west staircase. It overlooks the fields where students were eating lunch.
And they made a statement, visually.
They did. Harris took off his trench coat. Underneath, he had a white T-shirt with the words "Natural Selection" printed on it.
And Klebold.
Klebold kept his coat on, but underneath he wore a black T-shirt with the word "Wrath" in red letters.
Natural selection and wrath. It's like they were wearing their motives.
At 11:19 a.m., they raised their guns, and the shooting began.
The first victims, they were right there on the grass, having lunch.
Rachel Scott and Richard Castaldo.
Just 2 kids enjoying the sunshine.
Harris opened fire. Rachel Scott was hit 4 times, killed instantly. Richard Castaldo was hit 8 times. 8. He survived, but was left permanently paralyzed.
It happened so fast.
Yeah.
And then they turned their attention to the staircase itself.
Yes. Shooting at students coming in and out of the west entrance. Daniel Rohrbaugh was killed there.
And inside, the confusion must have been absolute.
You have to remember, this is a high school. Kids hear popping sounds. They think it's fireworks, a senior prank, maybe a paintball gun.
It doesn't register as real at first.
No. But one person knew exactly what was happening. Dave Sanders.
The teacher.
He was a coach and a business teacher, and he was in the cafeteria when the shooting started. He heard the gunfire, saw the panic.
And he didn't run away from it.
He ran towards it. He and some of the school custodians started yelling at students, getting them to hide under tables, then evacuating them out other exits. He's credited with clearing that cafeteria.
He saved hundreds of lives in those first few minutes.
Hundreds. If the shooters had entered that packed cafeteria, even without the bombs, the death toll would have been so much higher.
But they didn't go into the cafeteria yet. They went into the school, down the hallway.
And eventually, they made their way to the library.
11:29 a.m. 10 minutes after the first shot was fired, they entered the library.
And this is the deadliest part of the entire event.
Looking at the timeline, it's just a black hole of violence.
It is. The library massacre lasted from 11:29 to 11:36 a.m.
7.5 minutes.
In those 7.5 minutes, 10 students were murdered and 12 more were wounded. It was an absolute slaughterhouse.
And the accounts from the survivors in that room,
Mm.
it wasn't just random violence. It was sadistic.
They were taunting their victims. They were clearly reveling in the power and the terror they were causing.
They were playing games.
They were. They would walk up to tables where students were hiding, slam their hands on the top, and then look underneath. The infamous peekaboo moment with Cassie Bernal.
Harris said that right before he shot her.
Yes. He looked under the table, said peekaboo, and pulled the trigger.
This brings up a specific myth we have to address right now. The she said yes story.
The story of martyrdom.
Exactly. The story that went around the world, it became books and songs, was that one of the shooters put a gun to Cassie Bernal's head and asked, "Do you believe in God?"
And that she said yes, and then they killed her for her faith.
A powerful story. But the source material is very clear.
It is. That did not happen to Cassie Bernal. The witnesses who were hiding right next to her, specifically a student named Emily Wyant, confirmed that the peekaboo exchange was all that was said to Cassie.
So where did the God question come from? It didn't just appear out of thin air?
No, it was a conflation of events. A similar exchange did happen, but with a different student.
Valine Schnur.
Yes. Veline had already been shot and was on the floor bleeding. In her pain and panic, she was screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God."
And Klebold heard her.
Klebold walked over to her and tauntingly asked if she believed in God. She said yes. He asked why. She said it was because of her faith and what her parents taught her. And then he just reloaded his gun and walked away. He didn't shoot her again. She survived.
So the theological confrontation happened, but the victim and the outcome were completely different from the famous story.
Exactly. It shows how trauma and chaos can merge different stories into one powerful but inaccurate narrative.
There was also a racial element in the library, wasn't there?
Yes, with Isaiah Schulz.
He was one of the few African-American students at the school.
He was. And survivor accounts are clear that when Harris and Klebold found him under a table, they yelled racial slurs at him before Harris shot him. It adds another layer of hate to the crime. It wasn't just indiscriminate.
It was a hate crime within a mass murder.
Correct.
And then we have the victims who tried to fight back, even in that moment. Daniel Mauser.
A very brave kid. The reports say he shoved a chair at Harris, tried to stop him, and Harris shot him in the face. It shows that even in the midst of that absolute terror, there was resistance.
So the killing in the library stops at 11:36 a.m. But the event isn't over.
Not by a long shot.
And this is the part of the timeline that just makes you want to scream, where were the police?
This is the source of so much anger and frustration even today. Police were on the scene outside the school by 11:22.
So they were there before the library massacre even started.
Yes. In fact, a Jefferson County deputy, Neil Gardner, had already exchanged gunfire with Harris at the west entrance. They knew there were active shooters. They knew kids were inside.
So why didn't they go in?
The doctrine at the time. In 1999, standard police procedure for a situation like this was perimeter and contain.
Meaning what?
Meaning, you surround the building, you stop the shooter from escaping, you call in the SWAT team, and you wait. You treat it like a hostage situation or a barricaded suspect.
But this wasn't a hostage situation. This was an active execution. Every second counted.
We know that now. Hindsight is 20/20. But at the time, the officers on the ground were following their training. They set up a perimeter, and they waited. SWAT didn't enter the high school until 1:09 p.m.
1:09. That's almost 2 hours after the first shots were fired.
And more importantly, it's an hour and a half after the shooting in the library stopped.
So what were Harris and Klebold doing during that hour and a half?
They left the library around 11:36. They just wandered the halls. They went back down to the cafeteria.
And the security camera footage from the cafeteria during that time it's just bizarre.
It's so eerie. They look almost aimless. The adrenaline seems to have worn off. They walk around. They try to shoot the propane tanks again to get them to explode. They throw a Molotov cocktail at one.
But the bombs still don't go off.
Total failure. Their grand plan was a bust.
And while they're wandering around trying to light a barbecue tank on fire, Dave Sanders is upstairs bleeding to death in a science room.
That is the ultimate tragedy of the police delay. Sanders had been shot in the hallway around 11:26. He managed to stagger into a classroom where students pulled him in.
And these kids? They were trying to save him.
They were, applying first aid, using their own shirts to put pressure on his wounds. They put a sign in the window of the classroom. It read, "One bleeding to death."
So the police outside could see it.
They could, but the protocol was to wait for SWAT. The paramedics weren't allowed inside a hot zone.
He bled out for 3 hours.
He died just before paramedics were finally able to reach him.
Just devastating. So the shooters, they eventually go back to the library.
They do. Around noon, they go to the windows, they fire a few last shots at the police outside. And then, at approximately 12:08 p.m.,
They kill themselves.
they sit down among the bookshelves and commit suicide.
So by 12:08, the violence is over. But the toll. We've always said 12 students and 1 teacher killed, 13 victims.
That was the official number for 26 years.
But that brings us to the update you mentioned at the very top of the show, the 2026 perspective on this.
It's a really important and tragic clarification of the record. It concerns Anne-Marie Hochhalter.
She was one of the first students shot outside.
Yes, she was having lunch with Rachel Scott. She was shot in the back and paralyzed. She survived that day, but her life was, completely changed. Chronic pain, endless surgeries.
And her family suffered, too. I remember her mother committed suicide just a few months after the shooting.
The ripple effects are they're immeasurable. But Anne-Marie, she became this symbol of resilience for so many people.
She did.
But the damage to her body from that bullet was cumulative. On February 16th, 2025, Anne-Marie passed away.
And her death wasn't ruled as being from natural causes.
No. And this is the key point. In March of 2025, the coroner's office made a landmark ruling. They ruled her death a homicide.
Because
the complications that ultimately killed her were a direct result of the gunshot wounds she sustained on April 20th, 1999.
So, legally and historically, the death toll of the Columbine Massacre is now 14 victims.
It is. The event didn't end in 1999. The physical toll continued for decades. It's such a crucial thing to understand about gun violence. The bullet keeps moving through a life long after it stops.
We see that slow-motion tragedy with other survivors too, don't we? Austin Eubanks.
Austin's story is heartbreaking. He was in the library. He was shot in the hand and knee. He watched his best friend, Corey DePuter, get murdered right next to him.
And in the hospital, they gave him painkillers.
Opioids for the pain, which was standard procedure. But that prescription triggered a decade-long battle with addiction. He was trying to numb not just the physical pain, but the emotional trauma.
He eventually got clean and became an advocate.
He became a really powerful speaker on addiction and trauma, and then, so tragically, he relapsed and died of an overdose in 2019.
Would you count him as a victim?
How can you not? The shooting put the needle in his arm just as surely as it put the bullet in his knee.
And Greg Barnes.
Greg was a jock, a basketball star. He witnessed Dave Sanders being shot. A year later, in May of 2000, he committed suicide. The weight of what he saw was just too much to carry.
The blast radius of this event just keeps expanding.
It does. Which brings us to the question that hangs over all of this. The question the sheriff admitted he couldn't answer in 1999, why?
Why did they do it?
Why?
This is where we have to tread carefully because there are so many myths and theories. Let's start with the one we can mostly debunk, the bullying theory.
This is the most persistent one. The idea that this was a simple act of revenge against a cruel jock culture.
Was there bullying at Columbine?
Oh, sure. And were they sometimes on the receiving end? Yes. There are credible reports of kids throwing ketchup-covered tampons at them in the cafeteria. Things like that happened.
Yeah.
But if you read their journals, especially Harris's, they weren't at the bottom of the social ladder. Harris was a bully himself. He bragged about picking on younger students, on freshmen. He had a massive superiority complex, not an inferiority complex.
It wasn't a revenge fantasy against jocks.
It was a revenge fantasy against humanity. They looked down on everyone.
Okay, what about the cultural scapegoats? Marilyn Manson.
Poor Marilyn Manson. The media absolutely crucified him. They said his music was the soundtrack to the massacre.
Turns out they weren't even fans.
They weren't. They listened to German industrial bands like KMFDM and Rammstein. They thought Manson was too mainstream, too pop.
Manson wrote a really insightful piece in Rolling Stone about it later.
He did. He said if he could talk to the shooters, he wouldn't say a thing to them. He would just listen, because that's what nobody else did.
And video games. Doom.
The Doom connection is a little stickier. They were obsessed with it. Harris even created custom levels for the game called W-Ads.
And he wrote in his journal that the attack would be like Doom.
He did, but millions of kids played Doom in the 90s. I played Doom.
I did too. And I never planned a massacre.
Exactly. The game might have provided the imagery, the language for their violent fantasies, but it didn't plant the seed of murder. That seed came from somewhere much deeper and darker.
So if it wasn't bullying or music or video games, what was it?
This is where we get into the FBI's psychological analysis, the theory that has become the standard explanation.
A psychopath and the depressive.
Right. This was largely popularized by the journalist Dave Cullen, based on the work of FBI profilers. The theory is that this was a toxic partnership of two very different pathologies.
So Eric Harris was the psychopath.
A clinical psychopath, yes. No empathy, manipulative, grandiose, a pathological liar. He had this messianic complex. He wanted to kill the world because he genuinely believed he was superior. His T-shirt said natural selection.
And Dylan Klebold.
Dylan was the depressive. He was suicidal, full of rage, but also this infinite sadness, as he wrote in his journal. He was a follower who was in immense pain.
So the theory is Harris wanted to kill and Klebold wanted to die.
And Harris basically said, I have a way for you to die that will be epic. We can go out in a blaze of glory.
It's a very neat theory. It explains the dynamic. But is it the whole truth?
Well, there is some pushback from other experts. Some psychologists argue it simplifies them too much. For instance, if you look at the evidence, Dylan wasn't just some sad puppy following Eric around.
He had his own rage. His shirt said wrath.
Exactly. And Dylan was actually the first one to mention going on a killing spree. In his journal, long before Eric did, he had his own violent fantasies.
And Eric. He wasn't just a cold, calculating robot.
No. He was taking an antidepressant, Luvox, and there's the Nixon tape.
Wait, tell us about the Nixon tape. I think most people have heard of the basement tapes, but this is different.
Right. The basement tapes were the infamous videos they made in Harris's basement, showing off their guns and ranting. The police destroyed those tapes in 2011 to stop them from becoming propaganda for copycats.
Okay.
But the Nixon tape, Eric left a microcassette recorder on his kitchen table right before they left for the school. It's a final audio diary entry.
What's on it?
He says goodbye to his parents. He sounds emotional. He says, people will die because of me. It will be a day that will be remembered forever. It's a glimpse into a mind that is fully aware of the horror it's about to unleash.
And is doing it anyway. For the memory. For the fame.
For the infamy.
Which brings us to the legacy. How the world changed because of this day. We talked about the police failure. That failure actually revolutionized American policing, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It gave birth to a tactic called IRD.
Immediate action, rapid deployment.
Exactly. Before Columbine, the first officers on scene would wait for SWAT.
The perimeter and contain model.
Right. After Columbine, the new rule is, if you are a police officer and you hear gunshots in a school, you go in. You don't wait for backup. You don't wait for a team. You move directly toward the sound of gunfire to neutralize the threat.
That sounds incredibly dangerous for the officer.
It is. But the cold, hard math is that every second you wait is another potential victim. This new protocol has saved lives at Virginia Tech, at Sandy Hook, at so many other shootings. It ends the killing faster.
The other legacy is in the schools themselves. We entered the era of zero tolerance.
We did. Suddenly you have metal detectors, clear backpacks, mandatory ID badges, active shooter drills where you're teaching kindergartners to hide from a gunman.
We turned schools into fortresses.
We hardened the targets. And we can debate whether that makes kids feel safer or just more anxious, but Columbine was the catalyst for that entire security industrial complex in education.
But the darkest legacy, the one that keeps this story so relevant, is the Columbine effect.
The copycats, the script.
Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this, the threshold model.
Right. The idea that if no one is rioting, it's very hard to be the first person to throw a rock. But once one person throws a rock, it becomes much easier for the second person and the third.
Columbine was the rock.
It was the rock. It lowered the threshold for this kind of violence, for disturbed, angry young men everywhere. And they study it.
They obsess over it.
The shooter at Virginia Tech referred to murders Eric and Dylan. The Sandy Hook shooter had a massive spreadsheet of mass killings, but he was obsessed with Columbine. The Parkland shooter researched their tactics. It became the gold standard.
There's even an online fandom. People call them Columbiners.
It's a sickening subculture, but yes. On platforms like Tumblr and TikTok, you can find teenagers, a lot of them are young girls, interestingly, who write fan fiction about Harris and Klebold. They draw fan art, they romanticize them as these tragic, misunderstood anti-heroes.
A cult of personality built on mass murder.
Pretty much.
Which leads to the really uncomfortable thought I wanted to end on. We just got this entire deep dive dissecting their plans, their motives, their psychology. We know their names better than we know the names of most of the victims.
That's a sad truth, but it's true.
And the sources show that they talked about this. They talked about what the movie of their lives would be like.
They did. They debated which director should make it.
Spielberg or Tarantino.
Yeah. They were casting their own biopic before they'd even committed the act. They were planning their legacy.
We wanted to be famous. They wanted to be immortal. They wanted people like us to be sitting here talking about them 27 years later.
And here we are.
So the provocative question is, and it's one I really struggle with, by doing this, by trying to understand the why, by analyzing every detail, are we inadvertently giving them exactly what they wanted?
That's the paradox of prevention, isn't it? To stop the next one from happening, you have to understand this one. But in understanding this one, you keep their names in the lights. You feed the myth. It's a trap they set for all of us back in 1999, and we are still caught in it.
That is a heavy thought to leave our listeners with, but I think it's the right one. We have to somehow learn the lessons of that day, the failed bombs, the warning signs, the victims like Anne-Marie, whose suffering lasted for decades without glorifying the teachers of that lesson.
Well said.
This was a tough one, but thank you for walking us through the reality of it, not just the mythology. And to all of you listening, take care of yourselves. Stay curious, stay critical, but maybe hug your loved ones a little tighter today. We'll see you in the next deep dive.